All right, so let's dive into these phrasal verbs. I mean, everyone knows they can be a little tricky sometimes, right? But really mastering them, I think it's like unlocking fluency on like a whole other level. It's all about sounding natural, and getting those little shades of meaning that textbooks always seem to miss.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. What I think is fascinating is that they aren't just about grammar, though. They often reflect these cultural nuances and ways of thinking.
Absolutely. And that's exactly why we're doing this deep dive today with this dialogue. It's just packed full of everyday phrasal verbs. We won't just be looking up their definitions, though, but we'll see how they actually work in real conversations to give them that extra color and impact. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's like upgrading from speaking English in black and white to suddenly seeing the whole spectrum of expression.
Yeah, I love that. Okay, so let's start with bring up. Our source dialogue shows someone using it to bring up an interesting topic during a meeting. Now that seems easy enough on the surface, right? But I think there's more to it than that.
For sure. Bring up definitely suggests a certain level of tact, especially in a professional setting. I mean, it's a way to start a discussion without being too pushy or demanding.
It's like you're kind of inviting everyone to explore an idea together.
Right.
Instead of saying, we have to talk about this, it's more like, hey, I've been thinking about this and I'd love to hear what you all think. It's way more collaborative and considerate.
Exactly. And that really encourages open dialogue and creates a space for everyone to contribute.
And just imagine how powerful that could be, not just in meetings, but like anytime you need to talk about something sensitive or maybe gently steer the conversation in a certain direction.
It's definitely a subtle art, but it can make a huge difference in how your message comes across.
Okay, cool. So next up we have come across, which is all about those awesome moments when you discover something unexpectedly. Our example is from the dialogue where someone finds an old photo album while they're cleaning.
There's definitely a sense of serendipity there. You weren't actually looking for it, but then you stumble upon it, and it just brings up all these happy, nostalgic feelings.
And I think come across goes way beyond just physical things. You can come across information, ideas, even people in a way that feels almost like it was meant to be. Like those times when you're reading and you think, wow, this is exactly what I needed to read right now.
You're right. It's like the universe saying sometimes the best things happen when you're not even looking for them.
All right, so let's talk about look up. It might seem pretty simple at first, but our dialogue highlights how it's used today for searching for information, especially in our digital world.
It's really cool how language changes to reflect our world. Look up has just become a part of our online habits now, whether we're looking for a definition, checking a fact, or researching a new topic.
And think about it. We all look things up all the time. It's just become a normal part of how we learn and navigate the world. It's almost like a reflex.
I know, right? It makes me wonder if we ever actually stop looking things up. We have all this information at our fingertips. And phrasal verbs like look up show that shift in how we interact with knowledge.
It's like we're all walking around with these mini research labs in our pockets. Okay, moving on to run into, which is about those unplanned encounters that can make life so interesting. The dialogue has that example of running into an old friend at the mall.
It really emphasizes the role of chance and how we can make these unexpected connections in our everyday lives.
You know what's funny to me about run into is that it feels like it happens more in certain places. Like I feel you're way more likely to run into someone you know in a small town compared to a big city where everyone's a stranger.
That's so interesting. It really makes you think about how the size of a place and the way people interact there can impact those chance meetings.
Maybe running into people is like a luxury in our busy, anonymous world.
Huh.
All right, now let's talk about a phrasal verb that can sometimes have a negative feel. Give up. We all know that it can sound bad, but in the dialogue, it's a positive example. Someone giving up smoking.
And that's an important difference. Giving up isn't always a bad thing. Sometimes it means recognizing your limits, making good choices, and focusing on what's good for you.
It's like saying, this isn't helping me anymore, so I'm choosing to use my energy on something else.
Exactly. And that takes strength and self-awareness. It's understanding when to keep going and when it's time for a change.
I think that balance is hard for a lot of us, especially in a culture that's always saying, never give up.
It's true. But sometimes giving up can be the best thing you can do for yourself. It can free you to try new things and discover strengths you didn't even know you had.
Okay, so up next is a phrasal verb we can probably all relate to. Put off. The dialogue gives us the classic putting off homework example.
Procrastination. We've all been there.
Oh yeah, I'm totally guilty of this one. There's something so tempting about putting things off. even when you know it'll just stress you out later.
It's that battle between wanting something now and dealing with the consequences later.
And you know what? I actually think put off can be useful if you use it strategically. Sometimes stepping away from a task for a bit can actually give you a fresh perspective and make you feel more motivated when you go back to it.
That's a good point. It's all about that balance between procrastination and productivity.
So maybe putting things off isn't always a bad thing. Okay, let's switch gears and talk about takeover. Our dialogue moves away from the literal meaning, like physically taking something. It focuses more on taking responsibility or leadership. The example is a new manager taking over a company.
It shows how takeover can describe lots of situations where someone steps into a position of authority or control.
It makes me think about all the different ways we take over things in our lives. Sometimes it's on purpose, like accepting a promotion or starting a new project, but other times it feels more like you have to do it or it's a burden, like taking on family responsibilities when things are tough.
That's a great observation. Takeover can be really empowering or totally overwhelming. Just depends on the situation and how you personally feel about taking charge.
And it makes you think about how we view leadership and authority. Is taking over always a good thing? Or can it seem aggressive or bossy?
Those are some really good questions. It definitely depends on the person and the dynamics of the situation.
All right, so now we've got a phrasal verb that's interesting because it has both literal and figurative meanings. Breakdown. Our dialogue gives us examples of a car breaking down and a person breaking down emotionally.
It is pretty cool how one verb can have such different meanings that are both totally valid.
I'm curious about your work. Which meaning of breakdown do you come across more often?
Honestly, I hear both meanings pretty often. But what's really interesting is how they sometimes overlap. Like if we're talking about complex systems, whether it's a machine or a person, a breakdown can show that something isn't working right.
It's like a sign that something needs attention, needs to be fixed, or maybe even completely changed.
Exactly. And that breakdown, whether it's physical or emotional, can be a chance for growth and change.
Okay, to wrap up this part, let's look at call off, which is super important for dealing with the unexpected things in life. Our example is a simple one. A match being called off because of rain.
It's a direct way to say that a planned event isn't happening, usually because of things outside of our control.
And what's interesting is that call off doesn't always mean you're disappointed or upset. Sometimes it's just acknowledging that things have changed and you need to adjust.
Right. It's all about adapting to the unexpected and figuring out what to do next.
Okay, let's brainstorm for a minute. What are some other times we might use call off? We've got the match canceled because of rain.
Yeah.
What else can you think of?
Well, a meeting could be called off if important people can't make it, or a project could be called off if it's not working out anymore.
Or even a party if the host gets sick or there's an emergency.
Exactly. It's a really versatile phrasal verb that shows how unpredictable life is and how we can adapt to those changes.
I feel like we're really starting to unlock the power and the nuances of these phrasal verbs, but we've got more to explore. So stay tuned for part 2, where we'll tackle figure out and dive even deeper into this amazing world of phrasal verbs.
You know, it's funny, call off makes me think about figure out, because sometimes when things get called off, we have to figure out what to do next.
Oh, that's a cool connection. I hadn't thought of it like that. But you're right, figure out is all about problem solving, understanding, and coming up with solutions. Like in our dialogue, it's about figuring out a math problem.
And we've all been there, right? Those moments where you're stuck on something and then suddenly it clicks.
Totally. It feels so good when you finally figure it out. It's like a mental victory dance.
I know. But figure out isn't just about school or intellectual stuff. We figure out things in our relationships, our jobs, even just everyday stuff.
Yeah, it's like we're constantly surrounded by these little mysteries, big questions and unexpected things.
And that's what makes figure out so dynamic and versatile. It's not just about finding the answer. It's about the journey of exploring, experimenting, and discovering.
You know, it reminds me of that saying, the only true wisdom is in knowing you know nothing. It's like figure out. Reminds us that we're always learning, growing, and figuring things out as we go.
I like that. It shows that learning never stops, and figure out is what keeps us moving forward.
And what's interesting is that figure out doesn't have to be a solo thing. Sometimes we figure things out together by sharing ideas, perspectives, and learning from each other.
That's a great point. It shows how learning and problem solving can be social. Like when you're stuck and you ask a friend, a colleague, or even a stranger for help, sometimes just talking about the problem helps you see it in a new way.
It's like we're all connected and working together to understand things.
Exactly. And that collective effort to figure things out can lead to amazing discoveries and innovations.
Speaking of discoveries, I think we've had a few of those ourselves during this deep dive into phrasal verbs. It's incredible how much depth and nuance these simple word combos can add to English.
I agree. We've gone beyond definitions and seen how these phrasal verbs bring personality, color, and even a bit of poetry to our conversations.
I'm noticing phrasal verbs everywhere now. It's
Yeah.
like they were always there just waiting to be discovered.
That's the cool thing about language learning. It's about being open to new things, expanding your understanding, and finding those hidden gems in the words we use every day.
You know, one of the biggest things I've learned from this deep dive is that language is always changing. And phrasal verbs are a perfect example. They show how we think, how we interact with the world, and how we express ourselves in unique ways.
Absolutely. And that constant evolution is what keeps language interesting and alive.
So as we wrap up our look at these 10 powerful phrasal verbs, I want to challenge you. Pay attention to the language you see and hear every day. In conversations, books, movies, songs, what other phrasal verbs jump out at you? What makes you curious? What do you want to figure out?
It's like a treasure hunt for language. The more you explore, the more you'll see the richness and complexity of the English language.
Exactly. And don't be afraid to try using these phrasal verbs in your own conversations. The more you use them, the more natural and confident you'll sound.
You got it. And who knows? You might even find some cool new ways to use them.
So there we have it. We started feeling a bit intimidated by phrasal verbs, but now we're embracing their power and versatility. And hopefully you've discovered a new appreciation for the beauty and dynamic nature of English. Keep exploring, keep learning, and most importantly, keep those conversations going. You know what's really interesting about all this?
What's that?
We've been talking about phrasal verbs. Like, they're just single words, but they're actually more like building blocks, you know?
Yeah, I see what you mean.
Right. It's like once you get these building blocks, you can start putting them together to make all kinds of cool expressions that are way more complex and interesting.
Absolutely. It's like you're learning a whole new language within English. The more you play with those combinations, the better you get at expressing yourself.
Exactly. It's not just about knowing what they mean. It's about understanding the logic behind them, the patterns, the way these verbs work together to make meaning.
And that's where it gets really fun. Because when you get those patterns, you can start being creative with language.
Yeah.
You know, you can bend its shape and make it your own.
Yeah, it's like someone gave us all these tools and now we get to use our imaginations to build something awesome.
The possibilities are endless. Just
Sure.
imagine all the ways you can mix and match these phrasal verbs with other words and phrases. You can create metaphors, similes, idioms, even jokes.
It's like opening up a whole new world of creativity with language.
That's what makes language learning so exciting. It's all about discovering new things, experimenting, and expressing yourself.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into these phrasal verbs, I want to encourage you to keep exploring them. Don't be afraid to mess up. Try out different combinations. Push yourself out of your comfort zone with language.
Yeah, embrace the challenge. Have fun with it, and you'll be amazed at how much your fluency and confidence will grow.
And remember, learning a language is a lifelong thing. There's always something new to discover, a new way to say things, a new challenge to take on.
So keep talking, keep thinking, and most importantly, keep that love for language alive.
This has been amazing, exploring all the ins and outs of phrasal verbs. We've had some laughs, learned a ton, and hopefully inspired you to keep going on your own language journey.
It's been awesome diving deep with you. And until next time, keep those words flowing.
Thanks for listening, everyone, and keep those phrasal verbs rolling.